that's a sacrifice that we give to God, because it can be so disappointing when things and people don't turn out and don't treat us the way that we thought that they would. Sometimes you have to lay down a feeling or an emotion like anger. I just have to say that I'm afraid that we have become an angry generation of people. And every little thing that gets on our nerves and we think we need to tell everybody. You know, like anything that gets on my nerves, I'm gonna let you know about it. It could be your spouse or your teenager or a random person on YouTube, but you're going to voice your outrage. And I just wanna let you know, you don't have to tell everyone if you're angry. You can be angry and not say anything. And I know that anger is often an indicator of a deeper feeling that we're feeling, but I think that most angry people aren't really interested in figuring out why they're angry, because it feels good to be angry, right? As long as you're angry, you never have to change anything about yourself. You never have to accept your own behavior because you just are angry at everybody else's behavior. If they do this, or if they wouldn't do this, or if they would have done this, then I wouldn't be so angry. And I'm not saying that there's never a time when you can't get angry, but what I am saying is that you can't afford to stay angry. Because if you stay angry, then you will become bitter and you will become someone that you yourself do not even like. So put your anger on the altar. God can handle it. He can take anything. He wants all of you. He wants the ugly and the beautiful parts of your life. Sometimes you have to put your pride on the altar. Recently, I was having one of these slow moments with God, and it wasn't very pretty. It wasn't like I need to grab my Bible and a cup of tea and a candle and have a quiet time. I was talking to God. Because I was having a hard time. I was disappointed in something that was going on and something that had happened. And I was trying really hard to, do all of this. And I was trying to give it to God. But honestly, all that I kept thinking about every time that I was praying about it was these stories that I was making up in my head about what other people were saying about me. And I really was just telling God how unfair I thought that the whole situation was. And I wasn't making any progress though. And I realize now that I was trying to have an altar moment with God without sacrificing anything to him. And it was a few days later that I was talking to Stephen, and as I was trying to get it out of what I was so frustrated and angry about, I realized that the majority of my frustration wasn't actually in what happened, like the event, but it was in my pride of worrying about what other people were thinking about me. And I was just making it about me. And I didn't want to acknowledge my pride in the situation. I just wanted to be angry that it had happened. But it wasn't until I began to surrender my pride that I began to feel peace about the situation. It wasn't until I was really able to be honest with God and say, God, you know what? I'm making this about me, and help me not make it about me. And when I was praying about it, I began to see it from a completely different perspective, because I offered God the truth of how I was really feeling. Paul says, therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. That's the real way you worship God, when you get honest with him. And he says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is. You see, we want to fast forward from verse 1 to verse 2. God, show me your will. Should I move jobs? What college should I go to? Should I keep dating this guy? And God says, that's not how it works. There needs to be a commitment here. And that commitment is symbolized by my willingness to sacrifice to God something that costs me, something that hurts sometimes. And in this verse, this is so interesting. The word sacrifice is actually translated killing. So if you were to make a direct translation, it actually is saying, make your life a living killing. And Paul is saying to these people, he's saying, we're not offering bulls and goats and sheep anymore. That was actually easier. You bring it, you kill it, it stays dead. But this sacrifice, it's a living killing. That means that this thing is gonna crawl off the altar every chance it gets. It would be nice if we could just sacrifice our anger once and for all and move forward. It would be nice if we could just surrender our disappointments to God and move on, or if we could let go of all of the weights that we're carrying. It doesn't work like that. It's a living killing. That means sometimes it's minute by minute, day by day. You have to keep doing it. One scholar said it feels like a death, but on the other side of it is life. And that's why it's a living sacrifice. It's a sacrifice that leads to life. There's life when you let go. There's life when you let go. You want direction, you want guidance, you want peace about your decisions. It begins with a sacrifice. We cannot see God's will without doing things God's way. We don't get to skip the part where we have to give God something that's valuable to us. So we slow down. We build an altar. We bring God into our situation. We make a sacrifice. And then we see our situation in a whole new way. That's my last point, C. The more that you begin to release your situation to God, the more that your mind begins to be transformed. That's when you begin to have a renewed vision of what God is actually trying to do in your life. Not too long ago, I was struggling with the same situation over and over and over again. You ever been there? And I'm telling you, I built many altars. I kept putting this situation on the altar, and when I tell you it kept climbing off, it kept climbing off. And I was so disappointed because I felt like God was not listening to me. I mean, I had given him so many good ideas about how to fix this situation. You could do this, you could do that. God, make them do, I gave God lots of ideas. To the point where I got so frustrated that I stopped talking to God about it, and not in a good way. I was just like, well, obviously God's not hearing me, and so I'm just not even gonna pray about this anymore. But God is so patient, and he's so kind. And one day, I wasn't praying about it, but I was reading my Bible, and I came across this verse, and it grabbed me. And I went about my day, but I kept thinking about it. A couple days went by. I was like, I gotta look that verse back up. So I went back and I read it again, and I realized that it was the exact thing that I needed in that situation. So I printed out the verse and I put it up everywhere. I mean, it's kind of obnoxious that I put it up inside of the cabinet where our coffee mugs are, so I would see it first thing in the morning. I put it up on my mirror. I put it in my car. I taped it to a plant. And every time I worried about the situation, God reminded me of that verse. Every time I wondered what I was supposed to do, I remembered that verse. And I have to tell you, something shifted in my heart, but nothing changed about the situation. The only thing that actually changed was my perspective and my attitude. And I'm telling you, it felt like God had given me marching orders, like he had given me the exact vision and direction that I needed for that situation. And I began to have peace because now I had a promise. I realize now that I wasted so much of my prayer time trying to show God what he needed to do. God, do you see this? If you would fix this, if you would change them, if you would make them understand. And listen, there's nothing wrong with asking God to change your situation. Sometimes that's the only place where you can start, right? But what I found is that breakthrough happens when I stop trying to show God what he needs to do and I let him show me a way through. I feel like I need to say that again. Stop trying to show God. Let him show you. Now, I'm not going to share my verse with you because it's my verse. You got to find your own verse. But I want to tell you something. The promises in this book, they are for you. This is not just a book of stories. This book is life. This book has power. And when this book says, I will never leave you nor forsake you, that means you. God is with you. So if you feel lost or you feel lonely, you put a promise on it. When you read that Jesus said, peace I leave with you, that means you. So when you feel anxious, you put a promise on it. The Bible says that if the Son sets you free, then you are free indeed. It's talking about you. So put a promise over your addiction. You don't have to wait for Pastor Stephen to tell you about God's promises. They are right here. We got free Bible. If you don't have a Bible, we got one for you. Pick it up and read it and put a promise over your marriage. Put a promise over your family. God's promises are generational and they are ours for the taking. Abraham built an altar and he called it, the Lord will provide. Jacob built an altar and he called it, mighty house of God. Moses built an altar and he called it, the Lord is my banner. Gideon built an altar and he called it, the Lord is my peace. God wants to show you more than you want to see it. But it starts with a process. Paul says, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. Begin to transform and renew your mind and see your situation in a new light. And then and only then will you be able to test and approve what God's will is. Slow down, put that thing back on the altar, and then put a promise over your situation. That's where the power is. It's right here. But you're going so fast, you don't even have time to open it up and let God speak to you. Today is a beautiful day at our church. It's a day when we cheerfully bring an offering to God. And we've been telling you for weeks to pray about it and prepare what God would have you to give, because we want you to give, because God has given so much to you. And when we give it, we're saying thank you. We're acknowledging that this is a place where you speak to me, God. And so I want to give so that someone else can hear the messages that I'm hearing at a new campus or online in a different city or maybe even a different country. And when we give, it is a beautiful act of worship. But don't forget, when you give today,